Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Black Hills Information Security Webcast. We got our special guest today from DenSecure, which is a Wolf and company. We'll actually get into the details of who they are. My name is Jason Blanchard. I am actually doing the webcast today. Normally, I'm the content community director here at Black Hills, and I introduce the people, and then I leave, and I go backstage, and I manually tag people inside of Discord for the next hour. But today I'm sticking around, and if you don't know why, it's because I am the co-creator of Backdoors and Breaches, and Deb is part of the Backdoors and Breaches team where we create additional expansion decks and playmats and things like that. We are the keepers of Backdoors and Breaches. We make sure that all the cards go together, we make sure that the cards make sense, and we make sure that a high school student can understand Backdoors and Breaches all the way up until people who work in Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 10 companies who do cybersecurity every single day. So who is DenSecure? I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So we got Sean, Steve, Matthew, Malcolm, and Joe from DenSecure. So Sean, what is DenSecure? And if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Jason and Deb, first for not only putting up with us for what ended up being several months of back and forth on this, but for doing this today. So the short version is we're a cybersecurity assessment team. The name DenSecure is actually playing off of you can see the by Wolf and Company. So we're actually part of a 113-year-old CPA firm, and probably not surprising. The question happened more than enough as far as why would we want to talk to a CPA firm for cybersecurity work, that we went through a rebranding exercise of the team so that we can bypass that question and really focus on the work we're doing and helping folks improve their cybersecurity posture.
Yeah. And so when DenSecure, essentially Sean reached out, I've known Sean from the community, and I've seen how much Sean is a supporter and person who backed Backdoors and Breaches. And so when Sean reached out, I was like, oh, okay. Like I wasn't quite sure what DenSecure was, but I did know who Sean was. And so since I liked Sean, I was like, all right, let's do this, which turned into a conversation, which always does. And then we say, here's how much work it's going to be. It's going to be three-hour sessions, like working sessions with a lot of time in between for you and your team to work on it. Then it's going to be like two-hour sessions, and it's going to be a couple 3-hour or like 1-hour sessions. And it actually turned into a little more than that over time because like we really got in depth with everything. So DenSecure, congratulations. You got through. Other companies reached out, other organizations have reached out, and we only get all the way through it if you choose to do so. So DenSecure, the fact that you actually showed up and got it done is the reason why it exists, and the community can now use it. So speaking of the community and others, if you've never played Backdoors and Breaches before, we are not playing Backdoors and Breaches today. So Ryan, if you're showing slides, we're not playing Backdoors and Breaches today. There is a video that you can watch on how to play Backdoors and Breaches, how to use it to learn cybersecurity. So what we're doing today is we're going to actually introduce each and every one of the cards in the DenSecure deck so that you can understand what these attacks are, how these attacks are used by actual attackers, and then how you can start incorporating these cards into when you play Backdoors and Breaches. So if you're watching the recording right now, thank you so much for watching that. And hopefully you can start seeing how you can incorporate these cards into your scenarios for your teams to teach them very specific topics. All right. So like I said, there's a free version of Backdoors and Breaches. We at Black Hills, we don't like to just sell things, like we just like to give it away. So many years ago during the pandemic, someone from the community is like, I like your game, but I can't play it online. Mm-hmm. Could I make something? And we're like, can you make something? And so about 2 weeks later, they came back and was like, here you go. And it's Richard Fong just like created the online version of Backdoors and Breaches. And since then, we have added the additional expansion decks to it. We went through and modified the code a little bit to get it to where it is now, but thanks to Richard Fong for getting Backdoors and Breaches online, which means you can actually go to GitHub and download all this from GitHub and use it inside your own environment, so that way you're not using a public facing version of Backdoors and Breaches. So all the assets, all the cards, all the everything, including the code, is available on GitHub. And so if you wanted to do that, you can go to grab that from GitHub, right? Because we don't want to just like hoard this stuff. It's so useful for you and your team that you can get it. But if you do want to buy it, I'm not going to stop you. You can get the DenSecure physical deck from the Spearfish General Store. And our online store is called the Spearfish General Store. And anyone who's willing to actually put their credit card information and their address into a store called Spearfish, thank you for trusting us enough to do that. We've had people reach out to us afterwards and say, like, my bank called me when I made a purchase because it looked like super fishy. And I was like, yeah, I get it. So we have the play mats available. We also have the DenSecure deck. And so you can go ahead and get that there. All right, so that's enough of all that. It's time now to get to the cards themselves. And so we're going to start with the procedure cards. In the DenSecure deck, we added 2 new procedure cards. And we don't normally add procedure cards because then we have to like retroactively go back to the core deck and does this break anything? Does that break anything? But we believe that these 2 procedure cards are going to be helpful to help you solve these incidents. So we got the cloud event log analysis and the permissions audit. So I'm going to throw it over to the DenSecure. Like, they decided that these cards were needed inside the deck. And so we did that. So Sean, I'll have you start us off. Why these new procedure cards?
Sure. Yeah. So the first one I think is probably easier, right? A lot of the new attacks we were trying to bring to the game were cloud focused attacks. And anytime we're going to talk about, hey, if we're attacking something in Microsoft 365, you're going to want to look at those logs, right? You're not necessarily going to capture that through some of the existing audit logs. And I don't know, I thought that was an interesting part of the process. It made a lot of sense when you explained, hey, we're actually not adding any procedures to the expansion deck because then, everyone else won't be able to have access to those. And that really changed how we had to think about some of our initial cards, right? We went in kind of thinking, okay, here's some of the attacks we want to bring to the game and expand it, and there's going to be new procedures. So then going back and thinking, okay, is this really worth adding? I know we had a lot of back and forth, even just about these 2, bringing them into the deck, making sure, is there really nothing else that would address this or cover it enough to have the conversation? And these 2 certainly brought enough. So, the cloud event, that's kind of the easy one. Some of these attacks are cloud focused. So we really would want folks to be able to speak to that. And then the permissions audit, I think the quick version is a lot of the things we're talking about here are under that living off the land style technique where, we're going to want folks to be able to look at, what are we doing from a permissions perspective, especially with a cloud focused attack narrative. And certainly not all of our cards here are cloud focused, but enough of them where, we wanted to bring these procedures in and make sure if someone didn't have the cloud expansion deck, that they'd still be able to, defend against the attacks.
Yeah. You bring up that living off the land, and we'll cover that here, throughout the presentation. But we just had an organization reach out to us, and they told us that they built their own deck. They took all the expansion decks, they took all the cards, and they highly focused on any of the living off the land type of attacks, because that was the most like vulnerable part of their organization, was anything that was living off the land. So they pick and matched all the different cards that they could use. So thank you for creating those types of attack cards, because you're now helping organizations who are like, this is our biggest fear, or this is where our biggest threat, vector comes from, or threat services. All right. So moving on. All right. So now it's time for the attack cards, right? So it's the initial compromise, how the attackers initially get into an organization. So we got 3 cards here. We got multiple cards, but we're getting started with these. And big cred phishing, I don't know. That one brought me joy. I thought about making that into a t-shirt, like you would get it at like Bass Pro Shop. But to get started, Microsoft Direct Send Phishing. What is this? Because here's what happens. Like Deb's here, I'm here. We're not necessarily cybersecurity experts. And so when you all show up with your cards and like, we want to make these, you have to be able to explain it to Deb and I. And then you have to explain it in a way that Deb and I can understand it. And then once you explain it to a way Deb and I can understand it, then we can like decide, like, would high school students understand this and other people understand it? So what is Microsoft Direct Send Phishing, and how is that an attack?
Yeah, so I want to take this one. So I'm going to put a link in the Discord chat. So credit for this goes to Black Hills' own Steve Borosh for finding this. That's, I believe, is the original blog post that I just put there. And basically what direct send is a way to send mail internally to like a victim organization without any authentication whatsoever, right? So there's this endpoint that gets created when you spin up Microsoft 365. Originally, I think it was meant essentially for, site-to-site printing, scanning, things like that, right? But it doesn't require authentication. So I can send from internal organization user A to user B, and as long as those two email addresses exist, you'll see oftentimes on the victim end, they'll get an email. It looks like it just came from Bob in accounting, right? There's really no way to tell that it didn't come from him, and it works on almost every single engagement that that we haven't been to already and taught them how to remediate the issue. So it's super valuable to prove risk. Funny thing is, I asked Steve about this. I don't know. It was actually at Wild West Hacking Fest, and I'm like, "Hey, like, have you heard of attackers actually using this in the wild? Like, actual like threat actors?" He's like, "Not too many, no." And I'm like, "How? Like, it's just so dangerous and it's so effective." And yeah, it's wild. It's a wild attack.
And as you can see, for the detections, we have the cloud event log analysis. So this is where, that procedure card was needed. And so that's why we included it in the deck. Anyone else? Anything else to go along with this, or move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I was kind of amazed to see that actors were not using this out in the Wild Wild West, because just imagine you have I get in your environment, I find out who your security lead is, and I send out an email, "Hey, emergency update, software needs to be updated. Click this link." And every time I get on engagement, I do the same thing. They have direct SIM vulnerability, do it. I'm probably getting credentials because they're going to click on the link. They're going to enter their passwords because it looks like it's coming from their software, their security team.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how powerful it is.
Well, I'm glad it's in there because, that's the thing about backdoors and breaches. Like, when a card is played, you have to then have a conversation about it. And so if you're a team and you're putting a scenario together and you've never talked about this before, by including this card in your scenario, once it gets revealed and you're like, all right, so Microsoft Direct Send phishing, has anyone here heard of this? And if you don't see anyone's hands raised on like the defender team, we're like, all right, so now we're going to talk about it and what it looks like. All right, so Wi-Fi guest network escape. What's this one?
Cool. So I'll take this one as well. This one, so when we're doing wireless testing, wireless pen testing, right? Oftentimes, one of the more important things we'll do is test for segmentation between like production network and then the guest Wi-Fi, right? Your guest Wi-Fi essentially should not have any access whatsoever to production, right? It's for guests that don't work there, right? So sometimes, and luckily this is like less and less that we see this, you'll have access to the production network from the guest, right? And clients don't realize that. Now, what does that mean? Somebody in the parking lot, if you don't have proper controls around how far your signal goes, can sit there, right? Get on the guest Wi-Fi, especially if it's passwordless, captive portal type of thing, and just start perusing around your internal production network. So what could go wrong?
Yeah. And we put the tools on here like BetterCap, Metasploit. So what is BetterCap? Does anyone here want to take that one?
Yeah, it's basically kind of a tool suite, I guess you could say, for wireless network testing, right? I mean, we use that probably on every wireless engagement and probably for half of the engagements that we do. You can do all kinds of attacks with it. Wi-Fi DDoS attacks, the classic, PMKID attacks, maybe not as well known by some people, but you can do a lot with BetterCap with wireless testing.
Yeah, I was doing a demo for an educator the other day, and as we're going through and explaining the cards, he's like, the tools part is going to be my favorite thing in the classroom. Just being able to say these are the tools and watch the students go like these tools. You're like, yeah, these tools. And so,
right.
We always like ask the people who are creating expansion decks, like, what are the tools to do this type of attack? And I get introduced to new tools all the time. So if you're watching right now and you had no idea what these tools are, you might learn some new tools here today. All right. So publicly exposed secret key, or unless Sean, you have something else?
I was just going to add another plug for the online version, because then all those links are actually clickable, which makes it really great for being able to go and learn, really, which is the end goal. So if there is some of those longer URLs that people are like, wow, I don't want to spend time trying to type that in, go pull it up on the online version and just click it.
Yeah, it wasn't there for a long time. And then we had one of our developers like, I can write code for that. And I was like, oh, Please do. And so finally, publicly exposed secret key.
Oh, I'll talk to that one. Basically, just like you said, a lot of developers put their code out there to open source repository, and sometimes they leave things that shouldn't be in there, such as credentials, API keys, things that shouldn't be in there. And Trufflehog is a tool that it can look at regex, like if you have your own regex, you can put in there, or it can look at the another pattern you choose, but it's looking for basically either interesting files, interesting strings that resemble API key, SSH key, anything private that we may be able to take from that repository and use it later on. We see this quite often during pen tests. They'll leave a API key in a Git repository. We'll be able to use it, escalate our access. So I always want to check and make sure that stuff isn't left, especially when you expose it publicly.
Yeah.
And you can use Trufflehog for defense too.
Personal question for you as pen testers. When you find that, have you gotten to the point where you're jaded and you don't smile, or like when you find that you're like,
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. Malcolm and I were doing a web application penetration test recently, and we had found a web API key that a developer had put into a C# repository, and we were able to use that. And then it basically, what it did was it was able to validate certain email addresses, and we used that API key, and it had unfettered access, so we could basically validate email addresses consistently without like any kind of restriction. So it was kind of like that muhaha moment, but at the same time we're like, oh, well, might as well alert the client that time. So
always a smile, always a smile. Another thing that I do with this is if you get in and you're just interested in looking at your Git repository, is looking at Git logs, looking at the hash of all of your commits, and taking the earliest one and the latest and doing a Git diff between the two, and seeing if, hey, when I first committed this and since I last committed this, what is different? And then pulling out things from there. Sometimes people leave stuff in there all the time, but it's definitely a great thing to look at, especially when you're working on an external or web app.
awesome. All right. Awesome. Let's move on. All right, here we go. Next three cards. Vendor default credentials attack, phishing, and Trojan mail. I can't wait to get to Trojan mail. So start me off with the vendor default credentials attack.
sure. So this basically is if some sort of client, puts something on the external network and just kind of like puts it as default, doesn't really change any passwords or anything, we can basically go on and use Firefox and just go ahead and search for any kind of vendor default password. So say, for example, we're looking for, and we tend to mostly do Konica Minolta printers. And then we attempt to find the default password. And then once we do, we're able to gain initial access into the actual domain itself. So just change your password. Don't just set it and forget it. So.
And phishing, like we have a phishing attack card in the core deck, but I think we got to the point where phishing might help spur that conversation from just the normal phishing to phishing. Because whenever I do like an actual like social engineering, if I use the social engineering card, a lot of times I'll say you got a call from somebody, but to actually like have the phishing card in here, which actually creates that opportunity to have that. So phishing. Walk me through the phishing attack.
Yeah, so phishing, I mean, you pretty much said it yourself. It's a lot just like phishing itself. Like it's just playing on the human nature of people, especially with the thing that makes it different between phishing and vishing is just the human interaction there. It's a lot easier to call somebody, throw a couple jokes in there, get on a good terms with them, and then it's a lot easier for them to trust you and do a lot of things there. Versus just getting like a random email or something. So that's why, we definitely felt like it was important to call it out, because we're definitely always using this and, combining it with different attacks, using it on its own. And it's definitely always easy, not easy, but it's always important that, folks are recognizing that it's not just emails that folks are trying to contact you, through. They're trying to send phishing, phishing calls, phishing texts, things like that. But just being aware of like all the different avenues there.
Yeah.
And just to like pile onto that for a minute, I mean, like I found out recently that we are the odd duck on this, but when we do external pen tests, we throw in opportunistic social engineering and we use this a lot. We'll send a phishing email. If we don't get anything from it, we'll call the person. Like if we're pretty sure it landed, we'll call the person like, hey, by the way, this is actually the help desk. Can you actually do that thing? Right. And you kind of create that chain. So it's a lot of people will do like, oh, we're going to do user awareness, call 10 people, see what they tell you. But it's much more powerful when you put it in perspective.
I also
Especially
like
if,
sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I was gonna say it's especially effective if you call and say, "Now, I'd never ask you for your password because we've already gotten that somewhere
Right.
else, but we're not face to face. So, I need you to click yes, that's me on the 2FA prompt, right? And work past it that way, right? Everyone's been trained. I'll never ask you for your password. So, yeah, I'll never ask for it, but I already have it. And, I'm going to just send you this 2FA prompt real quick.
And no one asked about the IT intern either. So
Yeah, and I'll just add to the tool. If you have Spoof Card, if you download it in the Apple iOS App Store or the Google Play, if you have the older version, it's probably going to be the best app ever created. The newer version, newer users can't do this, but older users can. So if you're doing OSINT, you got their head of security, you can actually make it look like your number is calling them. So I can get his number, pop up on your phone, calling from him like, hey, can you open that email I'm about to send you? But I'm going to send you this phishing email with my malicious link in there. And it's so legit. And I love the app. So don't upgrade if you're an older user. Keep it, because now you only can call from the area code, in which if you call from the area code, nobody answers their phone now. So which sucks.
So, personal question for you. Do you still get anxious making a vision call?
If you're not anxious, you're a sociopath.
Good answer.
I feel attacked based off of that comment, Joe. I feel
So you don't
attacked.
get nervous.
I love it. I'm a people's person, so I love like interacting, and then I love like seeing after the report is done, like they'll send the POC, our point of contact, hey, I got this weird call from this strange guy pretending to be working with you or something. And then I get to hear myself in the voicemail and all this crazy stuff. Like, I love it. It's like my favorite part of the pen test.
You found out he's a sociopath today. That's great.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later,
Yeah.
guys.
All right, so moving on. Trojan mail. So
Yeah.
So first, before we get to this was another card and then another card and it just feels like this was another attack. But as we were explaining it and talking about it and refining it, it became Trojan mail. So walk me through what this attack is.
Yeah, so I mean, this is essentially just like social engineering in real life. It's like sending a phishing email to somebody, but instead of a phishing email, you're just sending them like a physical package with, a type of malware in a USB, and just kind of hoping they, follow the same steps, hoping they trust you and they plug in the malware and it, automatically loads on their computer. So it's just another one of those things where preying on the, trust and the good nature of people when doing that type of attack.
Go ahead, Deb.
I have a question. What would be some enticing labels that you would put on the USB? What would you try to have them be able to be like, oh, I want this? Plug in it.
Employee swag, right? Now we've got such a distributed workforce. A lot of companies haven't had people remote all over the place. So throw the victim company's logo on and say, hey, it's whatever. Happy summer. Here's your summer kickoff package, right? And you can ship that out.
Yeah, I think that's why this card was created, because we started thinking through well, remember, I think what it started off was leaving USBs in a parking lot. And then we realized that they're not working at the office.
Yeah.
So what if we sent it to them, right? And so we have a webcast coming up in a couple weeks with Joseph on our team. They've started sending postcards with a QR code on it saying you have received a gift card for being a great employee, essentially, something like that. And so that QR code is the fish. It takes them to where they want them to go. And so we're now starting to see more mail showing up, physical mail, because of that distributed workforce. So, all right. Moving on. Last initial compromise, we have HTML smuggling. And I remember you explaining this to me, and I was like, again? Explain it again? How does this work?
So basically what happens is, we're sending a phishing email with an attachment such as like an HTML. And within the HTML, the user normally sees the actual HTML being loaded into the actual browser itself, but they don't see the JavaScript behind the scenes doing what it can do. So basically what happens when the HTML is loaded into the actual browser, the JavaScript behind the scene go ahead and it can download any kind of file that you put into the actual blob or text in the JavaScript. So once you get that file, open it in the browser, the .exe is downloaded. Some browsers will say, hey, this is malicious, what have you, but most of the time it gets downloaded depending on how the JavaScript's written.
Yeah. Anyone else added to that?
Nailed it, Steve.
All right, fantastic. All right, now the pivot and escalate. So the attackers have gotten in through initial compromise. Now it's time to go from one system to another and escalate privileges. Now, here's the issue with backdoors and breaches, right? Like when you're creating new cards, you have to well, does this work with the core deck? Does this work with other initial compromises? Does this work with other C2 and exfil? Does this work with other persistence cards? And so there's that constant conversation of, if I do this, how did I get here? Like, how did I get here first? And then from here, how do I get from here there? And so that thought process is put into every single card that's created. So with that context, insecure Internet of Things. So walk me through this one.
So this one, every time we do like an internal pen test, right? Like we'll start going through, okay, like what web servers are exposed that we can get to, things like that running internally. And you always get to all of these different login pages for printers or for cameras or whatever. And like sometimes you'll find the default admin creds are still set, right? They were never rotated, or they were recently upgraded, like firmware upgraded, whatever, a printer was upgraded, whatever it was, and they get rolled back to what the defaults were, right? As opposed to what administration had thought they had changed them to. So Steve mentioned printers earlier. One of my favorite attacks, I don't know why, just because it's so sneaky and creepy, is an LDAP passback attack. What that is like you log in to like a Konica or a Canon. I think you can do both. I've seen it on a few different models, but anyway, you log in and you go to the network settings, and if they're using it like with like a service account and it has to auth via LDAP back and forth to domain controller, you can just change the auth server from the domain controller, right, to your attacking host, and then hit sync or check the connection, whatever. And as long as you have a server running that's ready to receive that connection back, you'll get the service account credentials to you. And on one pen test, those service account credentials had domain admin rights. Don't ask me why, but that's how it was configured. So it was 0 to hero in like no time at all. And it definitely, you do something like that and it will scare management into making sure that their default passwords are all changed.
Printers.
Anyone else, or moving on? All right,
Keep it going.
Misconfigured certificate template. What is this? How does this work?
Yeah, so this is another attack that was discovered by another security company, Spectre Ops, but essentially just has to do with Active Directory certificate services. What that is, just another way for authentication and verification in the domain. And a lot of the times it's set with default values, and a lot of the default values are like super insecure. So for example, on there you can have a template that is allowed for like authentication, and anybody can go in there and request that template. There's also a lovely setting in there that allows you to specify anybody as the requester, essentially. So you can request the template as somebody else. So things like that, it's like there's so many different variables within Active Directory certificate services where anytime we're on a penetration test and we see this is in use and we haven't been there before, there's usually an issue with it. Web enrollment's enabled, something like that. There's always, there's up to like 9 attacks, I think, based on their research from Spectre Ops that just based on various misconfigurations. So it's a really big attack surface that we're always seeing be exploited on, every client essentially that has it in use.
Yeah.
It's growing, actually. It's 13 attacks, I think, now, last I looked.
And it's one of the reasons that we wanted to get your perspective. Like, we didn't want to be just the only company making backdoors and breaches and expansion decks, because you have a different thought process. You have a different, like, you see different clients, you see different technology, you see different things. And so the attack cards that you could come up with, it felt like it would help round out the overall cybersecurity industry instead of us just trying to figure it out every time. So thank you for, like, here's our experience, here's our knowledge, here's how we can show what we see on a daily basis, or like on an engagement and pen test. So moving on to NTLM abuse. We never know, like, should we spell out the
Yeah.
acronym or not? Or is this a industry like
Yeah.
SMB? Like, do we spell out SMB? Do
When
we
in
spell
doubt,
out?
we spell out most of them because
Yeah.
acronyms can be the worst.
So it's high school kids. Maybe they never heard of it before.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Which is why we spell it out in the description. It's like new technology LAN manager version. Like, and the fact that there's like LAN in the acronym, it's like an acronym within an acronym. But anyway, so how does this attack work?
Yeah, so NTLM versus Kerberos, right? So all Windows environments, you can tell everybody, switch to Kerberos, don't use NTLM anymore. That'll never happen, right? I don't think I have a single client that's ever actually made that transition. NTLM v1 is much weaker than NTLM v2. And basically it's just a way to, secure a credential, right, as it accesses a resource. NTLM v1 specifically has a lot of issues, right? It doesn't natively have any real protections like for signing, right, to ensure that, like, okay, this person is who they say they are, as opposed to NTLM v2. So you can oftentimes perform like downgrade attacks with NTLM v1. Unfortunately, anybody here who's a pen tester, the crack.sh server has been down for, I don't know, a year at this time. So even if you do sometimes find NTLM v1 in use in a domain, it doesn't happen that often, but when you do, that downgrade attack has been made significantly harder, but it is possible to, like, crack a domain controller's password hash, essentially machine account hash. If you have that ability, you can also relay them off. There's some research done by, I want to say, Elad Shamir within the last year or so, where you may have heard of a drop the mic attack. So in a relaying situation, you can coerce a domain controller to relay through you. And even if signing is enabled, you can just drop the message integrity code or tell it to, and it'll just do that for you, right? So you can relay domain controllers to other domain controllers and escalate privileges and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So NTLM v2 only, and that in Kerberos.
Yeah. Anyone else to jump in, or? Fantastic. Well done, Joe. All right, moving on. We have more pivot and escalate. So dump an LSAS via task manager, default of administrator credentials, and decrypting LSA secrets. Once again, we're like, should we spell out? But at some point you're like, that's really long. All right, so first one, dumping LSAS via task manager.
Yeah, so this is just one of those living off the land tools that we kind of talked about earlier, where there's various different forms to dump LSAS, PsExec, stuff like that. But they're a lot more noisy than just like using the tool that, Windows built in, task manager. You can just log in, dump the LSAS credentials through that. It's just another, way to do it. And like we talked about before, living off the land. So it's making sure you can, detect that actual activity as well.
Yeah, so another thing with that too is a lot of our clients either have misconfigured EDRs or EDRs that aren't set to like the appropriate permissions for that as well. So what you can really do is just right click, open task manager, and dump the actual file from the task manager, and not a lot of EDRs will actually pick up on that. So make sure you configure your EDRs appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever the game is being played and someone rolls ineffectively, like a 6, and you're like, so why would EDR fail at this time? Like, that's a great answer of like, because of this misconfiguration, because we don't detect that kind of thing, because we don't have it set to do this. So that's great. And so everyone listening right now, like, they might be checking, they're like, oh crap, do we do that? I don't know if we do that. We should probably look to see if we do that. All right, default administrator credentials. This one seems pretty straightforward. but walk me through this attack.
Like you said, it's pretty straightforward. Like we kind of talked about it already on some of the other cards for like the IoT ones, but a lot of default credentials are just online. So a lot of the times we'll find printers, IoT devices, anything like that. And most of the time the admin credentials are just a search away, which leads to, various forms of attacks there. And a lot of the times folks are just not aware, that they need to be changed or that, they're being changed on upgrades. So just being aware. And that's kind of why we also added, I know the procedure card, we have the permissions audit. This is another area where it's just important to know like what types of permissions certain roles have, and if they have elevated permissions, making sure those passwords are changed and rotated periodically.
Yeah. Decrypting LSA secrets.
Yeah, so this one we sometimes find passwords being stored in the LSA for like service accounts, things like that, right? Within local security authority. Oh, you spelled it out. Look at that. It's right there. So within LSA secrets. The thing with this is like you have to be an admin anyway, essentially, to do this, because a lot of places, will write that these passwords that are stored there, the secrets that are stored there are not encrypted. They are encrypted. It's just a matter of like you need the admin rights to decrypt them, right? So if you can see those in plain text, you can then use those in plain text, right? And what if you have like local admin over a single host, you dump the LSA secrets, and then in plain text, there's a service account password, and it happens to also have domain admin rights, right? Or server admin rights. And now you're effectively privilege escalated with that one host. So that's kind of how that attack works.
Yeah. And one of the things I appreciate your team doing along with the other expansion decks is that there are resources here like Attack MITRE. Like if you go to MITRE, you can learn more about this. So it's not just about that small definition here on the card, but if you're a high school student or if you're in college or something and you're like, what else can I learn about this? And you go to MITRE and you can like actually figure out where that is, go and get the rest of the information. Anyone else, any more on this? All right. SUID permissions abuse. What is this?
Yeah, so this one, more Linux systems, right? So you've got a binary, right? And it has the set UID bit set. That is effectively going to run as whoever created it, right? So if root has privileges over that binary, and then a basic user has execute permissions on that binary is going to execute as if it was running as the root user, right? So there's a decent chance of privilege escalation if you find something like that, if that binary can do something bad.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So now we're
OSC people out there know exactly what I'm talking about.
All right, we're heading into persistence now. So I always explain persistence to high school students as like if someone broke into your house and then they realized they needed more time and more people and more things to help steal all your things, then they might unlock a back window or set something where you normally wouldn't check, which is why whenever I go to an Airbnb, I check every single window and every single door because I know that that's how the murderer is going to get in that night. And so I go through and I check everything. And I was at an Airbnb where I checked it was like a basement, sub-basement, but it had like an outside access. And I was like, and I lifted and the window just lifted right up. And I was like, oh my God, we're not staying here. And then later we did stay there. But later that night I heard something downstairs. And when I went downstairs, there was that door was open. And I was like, and my wife said, what I heard was you go, hello. And I wish it would have been braver.
Yeah.
I wish I would have been
that so many times. And I recently was at an Airbnb by myself and there were multiple windows unlocked. And I didn't freak out before, but I definitely did that time. Yeah. So thanks, Jason.
You're welcome. And now everyone else can freak out.
No, I didn't get murdered.
So persistence, golden ticket attack, screensaver hijack, which this one we worked on a lot. And then the SSH authorization keys modification. So the golden ticket attack, tell me about this one.
It is basically like it sounds. It is the golden ticket. You have the keys to the kingdom. There is nothing you can't do. If I were to talk to the high school student and tell them what this is, basically it's persistence. To escalate, to do this attack, first off, you need a high privilege level account. You have to compromise the domain, and you have to need the NTLM hash of the KRBTGT. And this allows for you to do whatever, access any service, access any system within the domain, impersonate users, whatever you want to do, you basically can name it. And this account is by default in every Active Directory. Normally it's disabled. People don't change the password. You need to change the password twice, I believe, twice for it actually to update. But literally, it's the golden ticket. You have golden access. There's nothing you can't do. Mimikatz is a big tool. Probably the easiest way for you to do it, because you just use the LSA dump module, get the domain SID, get the NTLM hash, and then from there you can run a command to basically grab the NTLM hash for the KRBTGTC, and then you can impersonate whoever you want, the administrator, whoever. Sky's the limit.
Yeah. Before we move on, just make sure that we have enough time for me to make this announcement. Deb, can you explain to people, if they teach cybersecurity and they would like some decks of backdoors and breaches for their classroom, like what are the steps that they can take?
It is very simple. You go to Black Hill's website and click on the Contact Us button and fill out a form, and that goes directly to us, and we would love to send you as many decks as you need. And I'll post the link in here.
Yeah. And so if you teach cybersecurity, you would like backdoors and breaches to either have in the classroom or to add to your curriculum, we like to give that to you for free. We have people reach out and they're like, so how much will it cost if I give it to all my students? You're like, how many students you got? And they're like 30. And then Deb, what do you do?
I sometimes send them 40. So, yeah.
All right. So screensaver hijack. This one just seemed like so much fun. Tell me about this one.
Yeah, so I mean, imagine you're, at home and all of a sudden a screensaver pops up and you have no idea if it's a real screensaver or a fake screensaver. So basically what this is that an attacker can create something called a .scr file, and that is a screensaver file. And sometimes when you throw those into VirusTotal, they kind of fly under the radar of being malicious. What you can do is you can insert that .scr file into any kind of read or writable directory that you own, and then go into the registry and set the scrn save.exe registry key to the actual screensaver file, and then you basically have persistence at that point.
Yeah, I remember as you were explaining this one to me, I was like, just... All right.
Just don't trust any screensavers anymore.
Yeah. I give up. I just.
Yeah.
All right. SSH authorized keys modification. How does the attack work?
Yeah, so this attack's pretty simple. Just anytime the SSH service is enabled, Windows machine or a Linux machine, there's always this file called authorized keys. And you can paste public keys in there, and essentially is who's allowed to SSH back to the server or the host. And so this is essentially an attacker, putting their own key in there. It's like them putting their own lock on your house or something like that. So they can always get back in whenever they want to, because they can just SSH remotely and their key will be authorized there. And it's a little sneakier since it's just the key in the file there. And you can maybe use an account you already have access to or something like that, just making it able to be accessed remotely there.
Man, I just pictured coming home to my house and seeing a new lock on there and be like, oh.
Oh, it's a good analogy, Matt. I like that.
Yeah. All right. Now we're in T2 and exfiltration, right? Command and control and exfiltration of data. So we got 4 cards here. We'll go through these and then we get into the injects. We'll highlight a couple of inject cards. But walk me through these 4 opportunities for command and control and exfiltration of data. We got unauthorized file sharing utility, hosted note-taking as C2. This one we talked about a lot, and then the misuse of remote access software. So first one, unauthorized file sharing utility.
Who had this one?
Sorry, Sean.
So I'll take this one. Yeah, Sean's having technical difficulties. So essentially, let's say you employ using box.com or something where they're not supposed to be putting data, production data, right? Let's say an attacker gets access to credentials for box.com, and they also have access to the network. Well, a good way to get that data into a place that's not being monitored is by putting it in that box.com account and then taking it from there. So essentially it's, the shadow IT, I guess, is a good way to kind of think it. Well, it says shadow IT, I forgot, but yeah, basically shadow IT, right? If you don't know what's there, how can you monitor it? How can you make sure nobody's not using it for nefarious purposes?
Yeah. All right, then
You covered that well, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, hosted note-taking SC2. Like originally we had a specific name here, but if you look down the tools, we have things like offensive Notion, Discord, and Power Automate. So walk me through, what is this attack and how could attackers use it?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually created this card, and I feel like every time I come up with some sort of new idea, Joe's always like, "Oh, Steve's come up with something again." Jeez. So basically, Notion, if anyone's familiar with Notion, Discord, they basically can be used as C2s. And I brought up offensive Notion as one of them because I found that very, particularly interesting. The fact that you can create something that's gonna then make the user actually trust the actual application that's being installed on the desktop. And so you have things like offensive Notion, you have things that, such as Google Drive, Discord, Google Sheets that can be used as C2s, and then perform remote code execution on the actual desktop. So,
yeah. I mean, the whole time I was like, damn it, like just fine. All right. So misuse of remote access software.
yeah, so in one of, as an example, in one of our recent engagements, we were doing a lateral movement through a domain. And one of the ways we could actually laterally move is by uploading anydesk.exe to a workstation. And once we were able to do that, we basically had remote desktop access to it. So being aware of these, remote access software such as TeamViewer, AnyDesk, or Screen Connect is very important when either you're defending or then also having a red team performed or something along those lines.
Especially if you're convinced to install said tool, so there's access fully remote outside of your perimeter.
Well,
So the vishing card with this card.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Maybe add phishing. Maybe add Teams phishing.
All right. And then the last of the C2, I called it persistent. The last of the C2 and exfil cards is the Bluetooth as exfil. So walk me through this one.
Yeah, this was one that we went back and forth on a bunch because the initial question was how far is the range really for Bluetooth? Like, is this real?
Yeah.
Was the big question. I think now that the Flipper Zero is everywhere, I think people are much more aware of how real the range for something like that is, if anyone's been having issues there. But yeah, the idea here, a lot of these other cards were focused on, some of the command and control aspects, right, or maintaining persistence, right? This is really focused on the data exfiltration piece. So, hey, if we can gain access, right, and from the game perspective, we already have access, we've moved throughout the environment. Here, we're exfiltrating data, right? And if we can be 33 feet away from someone, think of how many places you're working at, coffee shops, public areas. 33 feet is pretty far, right? And so if an attacker is focused, they certainly can be, within that range and copying files out that way.
Yeah. There is that, like, as we develop these cards, we're like, how plausible is this? Like, we're always asking those questions, like, is this just like some, thing? But like, when we really get into it, we're like, it's plausible. And that's the thing about this game. When you get done playing around and you've chosen the cards that you want, ask your team, is this plausible where we work? And I want your teams to say yes, no, or maybe, because they might go no to Bluetooth as exfil. And you're like, defend it. Defend why it's a no. And then they're like, well, because of this, because of this, because of this, and because of this. And you're like, fantastic. Look, good job, everybody. Good job. Right? Because it's not always about what the attackers can do. Sometimes it's about what the attackers can't do. And it's about what you've done well on your security team of like, we've stopped these. You can play backdoors and breaches just to show other people, here's what we've been able to stop. All right. So it's not always about what works. It's potentially what doesn't work because of what we've done. All right, so we have a few minutes left for inject cards. We won't get a chance to talk through all these, but the inject cards create chaos. The way they're introduced in the game, you either roll a 20, a 1, or you have 3 ineffective rolls in a row. And recently I was doing a demo and someone rolled a 1 on their 3rd turn. So they got 2 inject cards. And I was like, here we go. Let's see what happens. So we got this one, crank up the pressure. I'm just going to read it out loud. The attackers have started contacting your clients stating that they have compromised personal identifiable information and your company was not willing to protect it. Word spreads quickly on social media. Like, so the attacker contacts your clients.
Yeah, I mean, and this is coming, from real world, unfortunately. There's been a few healthcare facilities where, and not to go into too much of the details, but the whole ransomware attack is a big cat and mouse game of trying to make the victims feel as much, we'll call it pain, as possible to increase the likelihood of paying. And we've seen a couple cases now where, hey, okay, they're not just encrypting files, but they're taking copies and then holding those ransom. And if you don't pay us, well, we'll go ahead and release this. And then people start getting, calls. Just imagine trying to respond to a ransomware attack. And then also you have patients calling in saying, why is my information being exposed? Right? It's probably about as painful as a situation like that can become, from the victim perspective. And so really, hey, how do we make that pain felt in the game? Well, you had 10 turns and now you have 9. You need to work quicker.
Yeah. The next one right here, this one was fun. Like, we're always trying to think of like what creates chaos and fun and makes people want to keep playing. So communication infrastructure DDoS. And so I'll just talk through it. Is when this happens, the defenders, the people playing, have to use alternative form of communication for the next 2 turns. So imagine it's a Zoom session and now they have to like hand write what they want to say and then show it to the camera or something like that. Like, you have to not use how you would normally communicate with each other. And so you have to figure out what that looks like. And the incident captain can help lead that. But what we want you to consider is like, all right, if we don't have the way we normally communicate, then how are we going to communicate? Do we go to phones? Do we do this? Like, what are we going to do? And you would have to do that for the next 2 turns. And then you could hire DenSecure ahead of time. We always make sure that in the decks, there is some, it's promotional materials, but it's also something like, it's true. You could. And so not all cards are at a disadvantage. Some cards help you. All right, so the last 3 inject cards. And the one thing I want to encourage is that DenSecure, you put a ton of attack cards into your deck. You could have put a whole bunch of inject cards, you could put consulting cards, but you were like, let's put up a lot of attack cards. And I appreciate that. And I know the community appreciates that. So with our last little bit of time here, we got water everywhere. We got timber, and it's a feature, not a bug. Let's go with timber. A tree falls and knocks out power to your office. Time to head to a secondary location. Unfortunately, traffic is terrible and you'll be stuck in your car for a while. The defenders who rolled the die and caused this inject can't help the team for 3 turns while they're stuck in traffic.
This is one of my favorite cards, I think.
Yeah, and this is one, and obviously if it comes up randomly from an inject perspective, terrible. Whoever rolled that time or was responsible is unfortunately sitting out for a bit. But this is a really good one to keep in your back pocket if you're running a scenario. If you have any individual person that happens to be kind of overpowering, the simulation or the game, because really when you're doing tabletops, especially through Backdoors and Breaches, the whole goal is to be learning not only attacks, but what does this look like in our environment? And a lot of times, if someone is taking over the conversation, you're probably missing out on some of those learning opportunities. So this is an easy way to say, well, unfortunately, you have to sit out the next 3 turns and make sure some other folks are actually participating and thinking through what it would look like for them.
Yeah.
Unless you're Alex Martirosian, who's a lead tester who helped work on this, and he just consistently rolls 2s and 3s every single time he plays. He's the worst Backdoors and Breaches roller ever. Terrible.
Oh, we did have 2 more cards. Dude, where's my server? So this one is the
You left that one
servers.
in. You let that title ride, huh?
Oh, injects can be snarky and fun for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
The dude, where's my server? This is the server's gone. It is physically gone. And the thought was like a physical pen tester or just an attacker comes in and just walks off with the server. So then what? And so this one was fun. And then we had executive buy-in where they actually help. They help. So management helps. So you get a +2 modifier for all procedure cards for the rest of the session. So sometimes management helps. So to wrap up, once again, who is DenSecure and how can they get in touch with you if they need help from DenSecure?
Yeah, so first, obviously, thank you guys for letting us take up so much of your time creating the expansion deck. You certainly did not undersell the commitment there, but it was a lot of fun. We like using Backdoors and Breaches with folks a lot. We live stream games as well, so if folks want to tune in, we're more than happy. Those are usually posted up on LinkedIn. But wolfandco.com is the website. DenSecure.com will also get you to the right place. Cybersecurity assistance, but as I mentioned, we're also part of that CPA firm. So audit, tax, risk advisory, any and all of the above, we'd be more than happy to chat.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, we're running out of time. Thank you, DenSecure, for choosing to reach out to us. And then when we told you how much work it was, you then were like, I'm in. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you for working with Deb and I, and thanks for contributing to what the community now gets to use through playing Backdoors and Breaches. You've been fantastic partners as far as like spreading the word, doing live streams, teaching other people how to use it. So from us at Black Hills, thank you so much for participating and being a part of this game that people use to improve their security and learn cybersecurity in the first place. So
Thank you guys.
Sean, that was a great wrap up. Deb, if you were to wrap up all of today's session, normally I don't ask you this.
You never
question.
asked me this.
Deb, if you were going to wrap up everything today, what would that be?
Play Backdoors and Breaches. It's wildly successful in teaching security and helping teams be more secure. And if you need any decks, you can reach out to us. The end.
All right. So we're going to do post-show banter for just a few minutes. So as we wrap up, thank you so much for joining us today on this Black Hills Information Security webcast. If you ever need a red team threat hunt pen test, you can find it at DenSecure or with us. Either one works for all of us. And with that, we're going to wrap up this portion of it. If you can stick around for just a few more minutes, we'll see if there's any other questions.
There are some
If there's any questions that we didn't get a chance to get to. So if the audience in either Zoom or Discord has any questions, DenSecure, if you do need to drop, because sometimes you have a call like right after this, I totally understand. But is there any other questions?
I have a question from Lateral IVH. He said it's regarding CERT template vulnerabilities. Any tool suggestions to find them?
Yeah, so
Yes.
certify. Oh, sorry. Certify or certify. Certify is the Python version of it. You can just need a user account. You can, scan your own directory services, and it'll basically tell you all the issues with it. And those are really the two ones I would suggest. Certify and certify are really good at it.
There's one thing I want to show in case people don't know it exists. I'm going to go over here to the screen share, go to the online version. So if you go here to the DenSecure part of and you go down to scenario tools, and then you go to custom, you can choose what you want the attacks to be. So if you want it to be that direct send and then go to pivot, and you want it to be the default administrator credentials, and then you want to go over here to misuse or remote access, and then you want to go over here and include let's SSH key authentication, and then close. So now that is the scenario. So you can do custom scenarios. You can go and create those. And one of the things that we've seen other companies do is that it's almost like they send a possible attack scenario to their leadership and say, here's something that we're concerned about. And they just put the 4 cards together and they're like, here it is. And they send one a week. They're like, here's what we're concerned about. One a week, one a week, one a week. And so they just use this to kind of put those things together and say, here's what we're working on, or here's what we're concerned about. So possibility. If you go to scenario tools, you can do that and go to custom. Now you can always do if you hit refresh, it's a custom, brand new scenario every single time. So if you want to just like, I don't know, whatever, you can do that. And then over here in the expansion deck, if you've never done this before, we have inject cards that actually cause you to have more attack cards added. So that is the add-on solution where, sorry,
All the way to the right.
add-on scenario. Yeah. So you can actually keep adding on more cards. So if you wanted to, you could have to solve like, I don't know, 12 cards per turn. So you can make it real complicated. Just
Did we
in
ever-
case.
Did we do the math on how many different scenarios? I mean, now with all the expansion decks.
Yeah.
It's
So the original was 3,860 different scenarios in the original core deck.
just-
Since then,
Yeah.
I lost track.
Yeah. Someone could do the math and get back to us. That would
Enough to keep you busy for a little while.
be a
Yeah.
lot of time. Yeah.
While you're counting all the Hackett tags.
Yeah. Whew, there's a lot today.
Any other questions? Clink link, something went wrong, refresh page for live stream. Okay. Any other questions? Deb, do you see anything?
That was the only one I really saw. I think you guys covered, you were very thorough. So, I mean,
Good.
the whole webcast was explaining it and answering all those questions. So not.
All right.
nothing
Well,
I
thanks everybody. Thanks, DenSecure.
Thanks,
If you
guys.
so much.
if you do any live streams,
you.
let us know. We'll put it inside the Discord server so that way people can come and join those.
Yeah, we try and post them in the B&B Games channel, so folks don't know about that. I know plenty of other people are posting games, as well.
Yeah, that's right. If you put the word backdoors into the chat, we'll make sure that you get the access to those because there's only about 800 people or so that actually have access to those channels because we wanted people who actually cared about backdoors and breaches to have access to those. So that way it wasn't like everyone just showing up like, what's this? And you're like, oh, so you don't know what backdoors and breaches. Anyway, if you say the word backdoors, we'll make sure that you have the right role on the server so that you can see those channels.
About to get a lot more.
Those are also manually tagged.
I know.
Sorry for the extra homework.
No
No,
worries.
I love it. I love it. Interns, yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for 2 webcasts today. If you joined us for 2, if you just showed up for this one, thank you so much for playing Backdoors and Breaches. We hope that you bring it to your organization and you use it to learn a lot about your own security and about how attacks work. And with that, we're all done. Ryan, kill with fire, sir.
Fire.
Kill it, Ryan.